So welcome to the second panel titled Triangle of Islam, Judaism, and the Persian World. My name is Omar Sadr. I'm a research fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute for Human Rights, and it's a pleasure to moderate this distinguished panel. As a moderator, if I have a couple of minutes to introduce the concept, for over 2,500 years, Jewish communities have flourished across the vast Persianate cultural sphere, from the ancient courts of Cyrus and Darius to the bustling bazaars of Bukhara, Herat, Peshawar, from the mystical gardens of Shiraz to the scholarly circles of Mashhad. What emerged from this long encounter is the distinctive tapestry of Judeo-Persian values that have shaped how these communities navigate identity, belonging, and faith. These values, rooted in both Jewish tradition and Persian cultural sensibilities, manifest in profound ways in the communal life, where the hospitality and honor intermingled with the religious observance, and literature, where Hebrew prayers echoed Persian poetic and Sufi mysticism finds expressions in Jewish spiritual practice, and belief system, where ancient monotheistic traditions emerge with Islamic theology and Persian wisdom, and in cultural practices where the Jewish festivals blend with Persian customs, creating unique celebration that belong fully to the both worlds, yet are distinct from each other. Today, our panelists will explore how these Judeo-Persian values continue to live and breathe in the musical traditions that once graced royal courts, presented by Professor Emmanuel, and the mystical poetry that bridged religious boundaries, which will be by Ion, and the preservance efforts to keep the ancient community alive in the new lands, and also the efforts of interfaith dialogue between Islam and Judaism with Mustafa. So the panel, I will start with a short introduction of each speakers. On my right is Mustafa Akil, who is a senior fellow at Cato Institute. His recent book is about how Judaism and Islam learn from each other. On my left, I have Emmanuel, who was born in Bukhara, in Tashkent, but moved to New York with his family in 1999, if I'm right. Along with his academic work, he is president of Association of Bukharan Jews Youth in the US. Then I have Alan Niku, who is a filmmaker, but also he's working on mystical expressions of poetry and other stuff in the Persian world and Iran. And finally, the last but not the least, Mansour Aaron Karimzadeh, who is leading efforts to preserve Mashhadi Jewish heritage. So let me start with you, Mustafa. If you can have initial words just for probably 5 to 7 minutes.
Good morning, and many thanks to the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies and Georgetown University for hosting us here and kindly inviting me. I should say that I'm the odd one here probably because I know little about the Persian world, and I told that the first time I got the invitation. I'm being from Turkey, maybe know a bit more about the Ottoman story there, but I did study.
You are part of us.
You're welcome. Yes, you're part of us, but we're all together. Yeah. And but I did study the history of Islam and Judaism, and it was, as it was mentioned, my latest book, which I published a year ago, is about that. It's not in progress; it's printed, but it is titled "The Islamic Moses: How the Prophet Inspired Jews and Muslims to Flourish Together and Change the World." Now, the book is actually about, that was my suggestion for the publisher, it's about the Judeo-Islamic tradition. And I chose that title carefully because many people in America are used to hearing about the Judeo-Christian tradition or Judeo-Christian values and civilization, which is a term coined in the 20th century, if you know the history. Rightly so. But there's actually a deeper and older Judeo-Islamic tradition that many people forgot today on the geostrategic problems of today. The term was coined none other than by the late great Bernard Lewis in his book, The Jews of Islam. And he says there was this great Judeo-Islamic tradition, which unfortunately died out in the middle of the 20th century. Now, what is that? 19th century German Jewish scholars have had a very interesting interest in Islam. People like Abraham Geiger, Gustav Weil, and Ignaz Goldziher, they were fascinated by Islam because they thought, here's a Semitic religion very similar to us in many ways. And they spoke about the daughter religions of Judaism. One was obviously Christianity, but the other one was Islam. And they thought Islam was even closer to Judaism on many aspects compared to Christianity. And why was that the case? I examined that story, and it has two different aspects to it. One is theological, the other one is historical. Theologically, Islam is indeed probably the closest religion on earth to Judaism, and Judaism versus Islam. First of all, they are staunchly monotheistic traditions. No room for something like the doctrine of Trinity with respect to our Christian friends. And no room for graven images or icons and so on and so forth. That's why Jews always thought that the mosques are halakhically okay to enter and be present in, which was not always meant for the churches. And also, Islam is structurally similar to Judaism in the idea of a law, the divine law that defines your practice in your public affairs, the halakha, and the sharia. Actually, they're very similar traditions. Their historical trajectories are different. There's no halakhic state for 2,000 years. And I think that saved Jews from that particular problem. But we have Sharia state, so that's penal code still implemented. So there's a big difference there. But structurally, these are very similar traditions. That's why Moses Maimonides, in his Judeo-Arabic writings, used the word our Sharia to refer to the halakha. Now, how did this begin? It began with the Quran, the scripture revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as you Muslims believe. Now, there's something interesting about the Quran. When you read it, you will learn very little about Prophet Muhammad himself. His very name is mentioned just 4 times in 6,000 words, something words. But you learn about another prophet, by far the most important person in the whole Quran, which is the prophet Moses. His name is mentioned 136 times. Second to him, there's another interesting human being. Can you guess who it could be? The second most mentioned person after Moses? Sorry? Mary is a good guess. Jesus is another good guess. These are not bad. Most people guess Abraham. But the second most mentioned human being after the Pharaoh is Moses is the Pharaoh. His enemy. The Moses-Pharaoh struggle dominates the Quran, especially in the Meccan chapters, because early Muslims identified with the Israelites and saw Moses as the paradigmatic prophet, paradigmatic leader. Because Muslims were persecuted in Mecca, and the Quran kept telling them about the story of the Israelites, and their hijrah is like a kind of exodus story which takes them out of that persecution. So there is definitely a clear theological basis. That's why many Jewish scholars in history, 19th century German scholars especially, saw Islam as a religion that brought Abrahamic monotheism finally to the Gentiles in the most proper way. Right? Now, this theological affinity also allowed coexistence, and that's the historical part. Now, that begins with the very beginning of Islam in Medina. It's a complicated story, that's why I wrote a chapter, What Really Happened in Medina. But there is something interesting in the beginning of the first Muslim state in Medina in the year 622. Prophet Muhammad goes there. He signs a document with the tribes in the city, some of which are Jewish tribes, which is now known as the Covenant of Medina. Some people call it the Constitution of Medina. Israeli scholars did some great work on it, by the way. Such as Michael Lecker. It has an interesting clause. It says, to Muslims their religion, to Jews their religion. So it's not forcing Jews to convert to Islam. It says to them their religion. Now, this constitution later collapsed, and my argument is that's due to political reasons, but Islam's theological affirmation of the truth of Judaism continued after that. Now that's why Muslims soon started to, right after Prophet Muhammad, expand into the whole region we call the Middle East today, right? The Sassanian Empire, which was discussed today earlier, was replaced by Islam just in 2 decades after Prophet Muhammad. It was gone, and Muslims became the new rulers of Persia. The Byzantine Empire was pushed back in many territories. That's the Levant, Israel, Palestine, say today, Syria, the North Africa, and the Visigoths were pushed back in Andalusia, in Spain, what will be called Andalusia. Now, there's something very interesting. As many Israeli historians, like Moshe Gil, wrote about this. Jews welcomed Islamic conquests in most cases. In some cases, they actively helped them. Especially in Andalusia, there are great record. Because at the time, the real anti-Semitic powers of the world were the Christian kingdoms of the time. That's the Byzantine Empire and Visigothic Spain. And Islam came as a much more tolerant model. Not liberalism as we have today with equal citizenship for all. I think that's the ideal political model. But for its time, Islamic civilization came as a more tolerant model. And that's why Jews supported Islamic conquests. And when they were persecuted elsewhere, especially in Christendom, they migrated to Islamic lands. The greatest known story is the Sephardic migration to the Ottoman Empire at the time of Columbus. There were also Ashkenazi communities in Europe that also came to the Ottoman Empire. 2 minutes. And again, not knowing too much about Persian story, from an Ottoman perspective, in the 19th century, when if you talk to people around the enmity between Muslims and Jews, nobody would think, what are they talking about? Because actually the Ottoman Empire was the best political medium Jews have found at that moment for centuries. And we know this from a very interesting fact that in the 19th century, Jews of England were accused to be pro-Turkish for siding with the Ottoman Empire at a time when the Ottoman Empire was fighting with the Russians for their survival. Right? Russia was the greatest enemy. Benjamin Disraeli was accused by his critics in England to be a Islamic, sympathetic to his fellow Semites, as opposed to siding with the Aryans, and that's the Russians. Now, which means today, Jews and Muslims are not destined to be enemies, not because of their religion, not because of their history. But we've come to a very dark period in the past 100 years, especially in the past 2 years. My argument about this is looking at this from an Ottoman perspective. It's not a war of religions, it's not a war of peace. This is a war of national projects. Nationalism, the idea of creating nation states, ravished the whole Ottoman territories. First in the Balkans, then between Turks and us and Armenians, horrific story in 1915. And I see what's happening today and in the past 100 years as a conflict between two nation-state projects. One has been successful, the other one is trying to be born. And what I learned from the past history is that you cannot disestablish nation-states. You cannot extinguish nationalisms. You have to try to reconcile them by pushing against their maximalisms and allowing a space where they can live together. And I believe Islam and Judaism and the Jewish and Muslim peoples have enough heritage in their religion, in their histories, to put to the table to say, we can live at peace in this contested land. That's why my book ends by saying, from the river to the sea, both people should be free, and every child should be saved. I know we're not there, but we can still hope for it. And I think we have our resources to hope for that in our great traditions.
With that beautiful sentence, let's move to the manual.
19th, early 20th centuries. Shashmaton is a complete cycle of classical compositions consisting of 6 parts: Buzruk, Rost, Navo, Dugo, Sego, and Irok, named after the main modes in which they composed. Each part, Makom, consists of instrumental and vocal sections. The unifying principle of a Makom composition is a modal structure, while the dynamic metorhythmic organization of its components creates astonishing variety. The poetic texts of the vocal pieces are mainly drawn from the philosophical, love, didactic, and Sufi poetry of classical Persian and Turkic language poets, as well as folk verse. Performing Shashmapom requires a singer to possess a powerful and wide vocal range. This puts the emergence of variety solo and ensemble interpretations of Shashmapom, the classical Bukharian style, marked by its strict academic quality, is considered canonical. Next page, please. The Bukharian Jews made a significant contribution to the preservation and development of classical makom. Among the earliest Jewish performers of Shashmakom preserved in public memory are singers from the mid-19th century. Foremost among them is outstanding Shashmakomist Baruch Babayev, whose name is shrouded in legends and stories. We see his picture. Unfortunately, biographical data about him is absent from many works on the classical music of Uzbekistan, including even Professor Otanazar Matyakubov's fundamental book Makomat, published in Tashkent in 2004. A contemporary of Baruch was another great musician of Bukhara, Ota Jalal, also born in 1845 as Baruch, from a family of Jewish origin who had once converted to Islam, earning him the nickname Chala. It's known that Baruch was born in Bukhara in 1845 into the family of a fabric dyer and musician. According to his grandson, Abram Babayev, Baruch's father, Bobojon, was known in Bukhara as a musician without whom no wedding in the Jewish quarter took place. Displaying musical and vocal talent early on, Baruch gained fame on the love of those around him in his youth. Soon he was appointed court singer of the Emir of Bukhara, Muzaffar Khan. Please take another picture. Yeah, that's a picture of the Emir. He ruled from 1860 to 1885. According to Professor Suleiman Takhalov, Baruch possessed a dramatic tenor of wide range, developing and elevating a song dramatically, like a hawk, carrying it to a dramatic climax, and thus enrapturing his listeners. For his rare voice and vocal veracity, Baruch Babayev earned the nickname Kalkhok, hawk, eagle in the Bukhari Jewish dialect. More detailed information about Baruch Babayev's life and work was collected by musicologist Mahmoud Ahmedov, who recounts an episode of Baruch meeting with the Emir. One day, Emir Muzaffar Khan summoned the singer Baruch to his palace and said, "They say among young singers you have a strong voice. Sing us a few songs. We want to hear you." By order of the Emir, court musicians and singers entered the hall. After listening of 2 songs, the Emir, having consulted his advisor, said, "It would be good to appoint you as a masked caller. With such a loud voice, you could instantly summon not only the people of Bukhara, but all the worshippers of its surroundings." Having said this, the Emir issued a decree requiring Baruch to convert to Islam. The only archival document I was able to find in the Central Republic Archive of Uzbekistan about Baruch Babayev was compiled by the elder of the Samarkand Jewish community, David Kalantarov, on November 13, 1893. This was a list with the detailed explanations of the reasons for Jews living in the native part of Samarkand city who resettled after the Russian occupation of Samarkand, which provides the following information. A former subject of Bukhara from the Central Asian Jews, and as a result of persecution by the Bukharian authorities, he adopted the Mohammedan faith and served the emir as a singer, but desiring to remain a Jew, he appealed to my late father, then the elder of the Samarkand community. He referred the matter to the late General Abramov, who replied that all wishing to settle from the neighboring Khanates could fully count on the protection of Russia. Thus, Babayev, along with others, moved to Samarkand and, when needed, obtained passports from the district authorities. Babayev married in Samarkand after arriving in 1868, where he also died, leaving 3 sons. All 3 lived in the Jewish quarter of the city. The great singer of Shashmakom, expert Baruch Babayev, died in Samarkand in 1891 at the age of 46. According to Yosef Chaim Achildiev, in his memories recalled a conversation with Baruch's contemporary, the outstanding Shashmakamist Otajalol Nasirov, who said, "To this day, I know only 2 singers. The first is Baruch Kalhov, and the second is Levicha." The virtuoso Baruch Babayev's art was carried on by his student Yosef Gurgov. Next page, please. This is his picture. Yosef Gurgov. Unfortunately, the creative work of Yosef Gurgov has been little studied. His biography is absent from Professor Otanazar Matyakubo's fundamental book on the study of Shashmakom Makomat, and his artistic contribution is only partially described in another of Matyakubo's work, Conversations with Ilyas. From the source, we learned that the outstanding singer-musician of Shashmakomist Yosef Gurgov was born 1854 in Bukhara into the family of butcher, according to the source from the newspaper Bayroti Mikhnat from 1936. In 1874, at the age of 20, he contracted an infectious disease, rishta, from contaminated water of Bukhara. At that time, rishta was widespread, especially during the hot months. Those who managed not to become infected were considered fortunate. For treatment, Yosef went to Samarkand, where he spent 6 months recovering. It was there that fate brought him together with the famous Shashmakamist Baruch Kalhov. From childhood, Yosef had been fascinated by the music and art, and in Samarkand he began to study with the renowned musicians and singers Baruch Babayev, Kalhog. He had a nickname Yosef Hafiz, and he began to be invited to weddings and family celebrations. He had many students. Next page, please. Among them, David Nayatov, Gabriel Binyaminov, Jora Gilayev, Mikhail Tolmasov, Levi Babakhanov. Yosef Gurgov died in 1954, leaving behind a kind and honorable memory. The next singer is Levi Babakhanov, the name of the great singer, and Shashmakamist Levi Babakhanov is surrounded by legends and stories. His work is still being studied by musicologists today. Such is the significance of his contribution to the development of Bukhara Shashmakom. Ordinary people who surrounded Levi Babakhanov loved him and affectionately called him Levicha, although the singer was tall and strongly built. When the emir of Bukhara, Ahad Khan, next page please, heard about the talented singer, he invited Levi to the palace and granted him the status of the court singer. Word of Babakhanov's artistry even reached Russia. In 1909, the Riga-based gramophone company Pishushi Amur recorded 30 discs of Shashmakom, works performed by Levi Babakhanov, accompanied on the Dora by his brother Yoav. This immortalized the name of the great singer, and to this day these recordings are considered masterpieces of Makom art. On the record with the yellow label appears a photograph of the singer with the inscription Levi Babahanov, soloist of His Highness the Emir of Bukhara, with tambour and doira accompaniment. It should be noted that the yellow background of the record label signified the highest degree of the singer's greatness. According to the information collected by Itzhak Mavashev, apart from Levi Babahanov, the yellow label was awarded only to the world-famous opera singers Caruso and Chalapin. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Can you hear me? First of all, if I'd known that the video would have my shoes prominently displayed in it, I would have worn better shoes. Okay. So, first of all, who am I? So I'm not a scholar. I mean, I guess I'm a scholar, but I'm not a PhD. I don't have a degree like most of the people here. But what I do is I try to connect my lived heritage, which is Iranian Jewish, with the academic work, the stuff that I find in primary sources, in Judeo-Persian writings, in what people have written about us and what we've written about ourselves. I also have a connection to this group of people, which is cool, that the Afghan Jews, it's known that many of them were actually from Gilan originally, and then in the 1700s were deported over to Mashhad, and from Mashhad went into Herat, and Herat into Kabul, for example, and only a couple of Gilan Jewish families remained, one of those being part of my family. So we are all even more connected than we ever realized, which is really something that I find in my research that I do. So something that I try to do, I try to teach people, especially the young people from my own community, that the Iranian Jews, or the Persian Jews, the general Persian-speaking Jews, are a major pillar of Jewish culture. It's not just Ashkenazi and Sephardic. We are a major other pillar of Jewish culture. And we're also a major pillar of Persian culture. And I try to teach people about who we are, who we were. And so in the spirit of Rumi tonight, this Rumi event that we're going to have tonight, I'm going to focus today's talk a little bit on mysticism as one of the many ways that we can demonstrate how connected the Iranian and Persian-speaking Jews are to the entire region. Okay, so today, most knowledge of Jewish mysticism is about Lurianic Kabbalah, which popularized medieval Spanish Kabbalah in Eastern Europe and the Ottoman Empire in the last few hundred years. So since Jews have lived in Persia for thousands of years, the question becomes, did Persianate Jews engage in mysticism before Kabbalah was brought in from the West? So the notion of mysticism, the direct experience of God as a religious practice, does appear in primary sources from the Jews of Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, even before Lurianic Kabbalah arrived in the 17th century. From the advent of Islam, we find reciprocal influence between Islam and Judaism, particularly through Sufism. The history and practices of the Sufis have many parallels with mainstream Judaism, and these become apparent in the Persianate world in the last millennium. Persian poems by 10th and 11th century Sufi Muslim poets like Attar, Sa'di, Nizami, and Baba Taher can be found written in Hebrew letters in manuscripts from the Persianate world until the modern day, and appear to have been part of the Jewish canon before Kabbalah even arrived in Iran. Persian translations of Hebrew piyutim are Jewish liturgical poems. Persian translations of these Hebrew piyutim from all over the Jewish world include terminology reminiscent of Islam, often because of parallels between Muslim mystical thought and Jewish mystical thought, or even due to the more mundane parallels between the religions, as was mentioned. But they also sometimes include terminology much more reminiscent of actual Sufi practices. These are things written by Jews. The writings of the poets and rabbis of Iran and Central Asia from the 14th century onwards often suggest a dual proficiency and influence from non-Persian Jewish writings and from non-Jewish Persian writings. Did I say that right? Non-Persian Jewish writings and non-Jewish Persian writings. And this is true in their translations too. 17th century poet Aminah did translations of Et Dodin Kala and Ha'el Ha'ira Ur'eh, for example. These are famous piyutim. And his translations are full of literary metaphors that equally borrowed from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, and from Rumi, Hafez, and Khayyam. Even when Hebrew poems are written down in Hebrew without Persian translation, Poets would often alter them to fit local music traditions. For example, a popular piyut for Shabbat, Sur Mishelo Achamnu, maybe you've heard of Sur Mishelo Achamnu. It's probably written in France in the 14th century. It appears in Judeo-Persian manuscripts, apparently reformatted like a Qawwali song. Qawwali is a mystical and ecstatic form of devotional music popularized in modern-day India and Pakistan. And a recording of this version exists today among the Jews of Afghanistan. As far back as the 14th century, hundreds of years before Kabbalah was popularized in the Mediterranean world, much less in Iran and Central Asia, the Judeo-Persian poet Shaheen of Shiraz uses explicit Sufi terminology and imagery in his epic retellings of the Tanakh, the biblical stories, and even incorporates Islamic stories in parallel with Midrashim, creating a syncretic style of biblical storytelling accessible to multiple religions. In the following century, Emrani of Esfahan writes mystical Judeo-Persian poetry full of Sufi metaphors and an epic versification of Pirkei Avot, incorporating the same terminology of the Islamic mystics by whom he was surrounded. The case of Sarmad Kashani, Sarmad Kashani was a 17th century Iranian Jewish rabbi who became an explicit Sufi and traveled to Delhi in India. He joined the syncretic court of the Mughal prince at the time. His story is essential here. Through Sarmad's many interactions with other religions in the Persianate world, he became a scholar and poet whose biography and literary themes of alienation, mysticism, atheism, love, lust, and longing sometimes contradict themselves. Though his poetry is all but forgotten today in the Persianate world, it remains popular in India. Kabbalah and its terminology do begin to appear in Persian Jewish manuscripts from the 17th century onwards with Sephirotic names, the names of the emanations of God in Kabbalistic thought, appearing in poetry along with references to Messianism, Sephardic liturgy, and quotations from the Zohar. But these Lurianic ideas were often still secondary to the Islamic-style mysticism already present in the Jewish traditions of Asia. In 1684, Ragheb, also known as Elisha ben Shemuel, a mostly Hebrew poet from Kashan who moved to Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan. In 1684, he wrote the Judeo-Persian work called Shahzadeh va-Sufi, a Jewish version of the life of Siddhartha. The Sufi master in the story, because it's Shahzadeh va-Sufi, the Sufi master is presented as a Jew, and the tale is a Jewish one, replete with the same mystical language that we see in the region. In other words, to someone like Ragheb, a deeply religious and fully Jewish poet and rabbi, there was no contradiction in presenting Sufism or even South Asian Buddhist mysticism as a thoroughly Jewish phenomenon. And there was certainly no insecurity around Persianate Judaism's place in the Jewish world. This Persian character permeates his writings, with very little reference to Kabbalah reigning supreme in Jewish communities to the west. In the 18th century, Rabbi Simantov Melamed, who was born in Yazd in Iran, moved to Herat in Afghanistan, and finally to Mashhad in Iran. Simantov Melamed appears not only to use Sufi terminology, but have actually been a practicing Sufi. His poetry often parallels that of Zikr rituals, and despite his life of forced disputations against Shia clerics, he still writes poems praising Muslims and their philosophies and practices that he agrees with. His magnum opus, Hayat ol-Ruh, or Life of the Soul, was printed by Bukharian Jews in Jerusalem in the early 20th century and essentially functions as a Jewish Sufi manual based on the works of classic Jewish authors Bahia ibn Pakuda and Maimonides. So he took the works of Maimonides and turned them into a Sufi manual, which is really weird and interesting, and the poetry in it is very, very cool. And none of this stuff is fully in the past either, right? Until the modern day, it remained not unusual for Jews to be part of Muslim Sufi orders. The autobiography of Yedidia Shofet, the chief rabbi of the Iranian Jews in the 20th century, tells such a story. And even today, as our communities assimilate to other forms of Judaism in the West or in Israel, the literary, musical, and poetic cultures of Iran and Central Asia, which are by default steeped in the mysticism of Islam, remain important to the Jews of the Persianate world. Even the most westernized Iranian Jews of my parents' generation, the ones who wear black hats and look like rabbis from like 17th century Belarus, Or even the ones who go to work on Yom Kippur, right? All of the different types of Iranian Jews can recite lines from Sufi poems in Persian. If only they knew how connected those poems and the Persianate mysticism and music that flavors them are to their own heritage, their own Jewish heritage. So, thank you for being here.
So I'll just talk. Because everything I wanted to say is already been said by Professor Soltis, starting from all over. But I'll say from what I was going to say anyway. So the topic of our conversation is about Persian. Persianate is from 11th century to 19th century, as I understand. So I tried to talk about that period of time, whatever is relevant. First of all, as has been said by Professor here, the Jewish relationship with Iran, with Persia, goes back a long, long way, 26, 27 centuries ago. After the destruction of the first temple, Babylonians took Jews slaves to Babylon, and then a few years later, Cyrus the Great came and freed them up and told the Jews, if you want to go back to Jerusalem and build your temple, you're free to go. And he also helped them monetarily. Some went to Jerusalem, but some didn't. Some stayed there, as one of my previous speakers said. The Babylonian Talmud is written actually in Babylon by these Jews. So these Jews in Babylon slowly went eastward. So I am from Mashhad. I was born in Iran in Mashhad. But I was a kid and we left Iran many years ago. But anyway, so I call myself Mashhadi. So we got there also from Gilan, that Mr. Nichols said here. So these Babylonian Jews slowly moved to eastwards to Babylon of then is Iraq of today, and that was part of Iran. So slowly they moved eastwards to Gilan, which is one part of North Iran. And in 1732, Nader Shah, who was the king in Iran, took these 50 families of these Jews to Mashhad to look after his treasury, and there's a long story of what happens after. So us Jews have been in Iran for 2,500 years. So we were in Iran before Muslims came, before the Arabs came. We were in Iran before when the Zoroastrians were there, and the famous Esther Mordechai, the Queen of Esther book. The king says to Esther, "Tell me what you want. I'll give you half the country." So effectively, half of Iran belongs to us. So the relationship between Jews and the local people, the Zoroastrians first, and then later on Muslims in the 7th century, and then later on Shiites in the 16th century, has been up and down, but mostly has been good. And as Mr. Nikud said, we have a lot of professionals who were in Iran, and they make an intellectual fabric of the Iranian society. The biblical ones, I said, Esther Mordechai. There is the tomb of Esther Mordechai is in Hamadan of today. When I was a child, my father took me to see it, and it's still there. We also have Daniel the prophet. He's also buried in Iran, and also Habakkuk, also buried in Iran. One of them is buried in Susa, and the other one is in Hamadan. Now, there was also a lot of poetry and a lot of doctors at that time. Shahin Shirazi, which he mentioned, is a 14th century Judeo-Persian poet, and his main work is translation of the whole of Bible, the 5 books of Bible, into Farsi in poetry, not in poetry. I've only seen a couple of pages, but in Hebrew characters. I've seen a couple of pages of it, and it's amazing, and the poetry is so beautiful. And I also found a book of this Shahin Shirazi in London, and they're sending it to me because we wanted for a museum. there is another famous, so Chinese Shiraz was in 14th century. Another famous doctor and statesman, historian, physician was Rashid ad-Din Tafi. He was in 12th, 13th centuries, and he became the doctor of the local Khan at the time, and he is also famous. Another one who's very famous is Yusuf Yehudi, 1788. He was also a Judeo-Persian poet from Bukhara originally in Central Asia. Now, more recently, I try to keep mine not up to 19th century, but we have Suleiman Haim, is more recent, 1887-1970. He was a lexicographer, translator, playwright, and essayist. And he is referred to as Iran's father of the bilingual dictionary. Even today, after he's been passed away for many, many years, the people still use his dictionaries. And another one, 1900-1990, is Murtaza Dawood. Many of us know Murtaza Dawood. He was a musician, a master Persian musician. He revived classical Persian music, and one of his famous songs is Morgh Sahar, is Dawn Bird, which he wrote in 1927, and it is still today is sung by many of the Persian singers. So, Persia or Iran, it became Islamic country in mid-7th century, following the end of the Sassanid Empire. So that was marking the end of the Zoroastrian religion, national religion. So, but in 16th century, as I said, under Safavids, the Persians adopted Shiite Islam as their official religion. And during all this time, before and after Islamization of the Persianate world, Jews lived across many regions, coexisting with local population, and largely converted, who already had largely converted to Islam. This coexistence persisted through the years, and it changed a little bit after the change from Sunni to Shiite Islam. So after that happened, there were some significant, at times, significant hostilities and restrictions to Jews. There was, especially after the 16th century, Iran becoming a Shia country. There are many different stories, but overall, during this time, the Jews survived, the Jews prospered, the Jews added to the culture and the fabric of the country, especially on the business side as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is 1 p.m. and we are on the lunchtime. Can we borrow some time from your lunchtime? Yes. Because we started late. Before me asking questions, can I, now the floor is open, can I request you to keep your questions brief and to address the specific speaker? Really appreciate it. Mr. John.
Thank you so much. I've been learning so much from everybody. I realize I'm nearly ignorant, but I have a question both for this panel, for the previous panel, and for everybody who's here, because I don't think I'll ever get an opportunity that have the three religions so expertly in one room. My experience is that among Afghans, we have very, very, very little knowledge of Judaism or Christianity. And my experience in my 57 years in the United States is that Americans have so little knowledge of the other religions. And the same for everyone. Is there somebody here, or maybe anybody knows about a book that has made a study and developed a table of all the things that we have in common? I have done a book called Women in the Quran, and I know so many things, and I've done a little bit study of the Bible, and I know we have so much in common, and today you're telling me we have so much in common in Judaism. Wouldn't that help if we have a book that's like an Excel file that tells us these things are in all of the 3 books, and it might help really reduce the level of conflict and hostility. Thank you.
Let's collect 3 questions and then we will come to the last at the end.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been a great panel. My question is actually a little bit related, and it's, how has this history been taught in Persian, or in Dari, or in Tajik, or in Uzbek? And basically, how have these states, now states, right, or, dating back maybe pre-70s, just how has this history of the triangle of Judaism, Islam, and the Persian world been taught in those languages? Thank you.
Thank you for the very eye-opening speech. My question is for Mr. Mustafa. Dr. Mustafa, you talked about the very good days of Judaism and Islam, and you said that there was no problem, it was very coexistent. My question is that do you think returning back to Sufism, which is very tolerant, very peaceful, and coexistent in Islam, and which is very similar to Kabbalah in Judaism, would be one of the solutions of these all tragedies that we are facing? Probably one of the biggest reasons is the politicization of religions on the both sides, or the instrumentalizations of holy issues. And also, as Ms. Nassim mentioned about it, that maybe Kabbalah and Sufism and the good big religions are one of the common ground that we can work. Because we remember that in the good days of Afghanistan, particularly the region that I'm coming from, when we had Sufism, we had almost 0 problems with all these radicalizations that we are facing nowadays. Thank you so much.
And the last question.
Thank you, Emmanuel, about your speech about common Bukhari Jews, but today we cannot say about this culture without Tajik, Uzbek, Muslim culture. We cannot say only about Bukhari Jews. And question is that Shashmakam is not only vocal music. Shashmakam is instrumental music too. And this question why Bukhari Jews was a great singer. And we need to explain this because it's very specifically musical life and Bukharian Jewish community do this. And singer of Emir of Bukhara and most of them was Chala. Only one of them, Levitcher, was only like Jews.
Is there a question?
Yes. And if we say about Shashmakon, we must explain all this picture about why the people move to Samarkand, why the Emirate was until 1921, and they moved to Samarkand, and why Samarkand Maqam school was very different than Bukharan. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have the responses and then
I didn't do an Excel file. I didn't do an Excel file, but I wrote 2 books. One is titled The Islamic Jesus, the other one is called The Islamic Moses, which shows Islam's parallel to Christianity and Judaism in their own ways. But you're right that I think we lost the sense of that connectedness. I think in America, a lot of people perceive a Judeo-Christian tradition and Islam a very distant cousin, at best, or if not an enemy. Whereas I believe in an Abrahamic triangle. And I think this conference definitely contributes to that understanding, so I very much appreciate it. And we need to be working more on these. Now, regarding the other question directed to me, I wouldn't say there were no problems or it was a totally romantic, rosy history there. There are periods of persecution of Jews. I mean, one happened in Andalusia under the Almohads. There are episodes in Yemen and in Persia, which we mentioned too, and they were not equal with Muslims legally. So today's, from a modern liberal perspective, that's discrimination. That's not going to be accepted. Just to add that the Ottomans abolished that dhimmi status in the 19th century, actually brought equal citizenship, so there was an evolution there. But the persecution of Jews in Islam, according to Bernard Lewis, was atypical and rare, whereas in Christendom it was typical and very frequent. Right? So it was the best medium in the conditions of the time. Now, in the modern world, we can aspire for full equal rights and everything. Now, so what was the question? Sorry.
The question was returning back to Sufism.
Oh, okay, Sufism. Look, Sufism actually connected us in history. Abraham Maimonides was rightly mentioned here today. He initiated a Jewish Sufism in Egypt. And he thought that Sufism is great because Islam is a kosher religion, right? Noahide, monotheist. We can learn from Muslim practices. We worship the same God, no problem about that. And it has that connecting element. The political manifestations of Sufism can vary. But I do believe that commonality is very important. And what needs to happen is we have to denationalize our understanding of our great faiths. It's about a land dispute between two peoples, Israelis and Palestinians. I want the best for them. I want safety and happiness for both of them. But this is a land struggle, right? It's not about our religions. It's not about who we are. Land will end when we can make them live together peacefully somehow, which has not been possible for 100 years. But that's not an aspiration we can give up, I think. And one thing, this was a national conflict in the beginning, but religion entered into the scene on both sides. Unfortunately, at times as militant elements, making it worse. But that's precisely why I think religion should be in the picture as a moderating force. Sufism, history, theological connections, all we can use, I think, should be there. And also we should speak up in our own communities to the people who demonize the other side, saying that no, they're not our enemies, we can live together. And by doing this, and I see those voices on both sides today, which are really making it harder.
I want to answer the question about similarities between the different cultures. In Israel, Dr. Shlomo Chizak organized a center and dedicated his life in research on similarities between Judaism and Christianity and published several works on that topic. His idea was, instead of making difference between us, let's make similarities within us. And to the question of Mr. Niktalov, thank you so much, Mr. Niktalov. Your ideas were absolutely right. Unfortunately, we had a time limit and I could not explain everything what you mentioned in your question. Just want to mention that my thesis was dedicated to the time frame 19th century to early 20th century. That's why I did not mention difference between Samarkand school and Bukharian school of Shashmakhom. Thank you so much.
The only thing I have to add is I think a good manual for the similarities and differences of the religions would be the primary source of the Tanakh, the New Testament, and the Quran. Those lay it out in some degree in the following writings, but we don't have access to those.
Two more questions from you.
I just have a quick comment and I think I can speak loud. Right? No? Oh, okay. Okay. So thank you very much for a very interesting panel. Just a quick comment to Mustafa. You cannot talk about the Ottomans without talking about Iran. I'm sure that your grandfathers were Persian speaking also, right? so that's as far as that is concerned. To Emmanuel, you know, the Dasgah music, the Maqam music goes back actually long time ago. I mean centuries, right? The first, to the Parthians actually, right? So that's that. And then to Mansour, Iran. Conversion was not an overnight thing at all, So until the Safavids, right, you can think of many kinds of many kinds of religions spreading in Iran, right? So to the whole panel, you should listen to Gad and I more.
I just want to make a quick comment in regards to what Dr. Akbo mentioned about Sultan Bayezid. I think it's fair that we should give proper reference to what he did by issuing many turgos, many farmans to the European governors, saying that they must protect the Jews and help the Jews to come to the Ottoman Empire. And for everybody's information, there is a plaque in his memory at the Sephardi Foundation in New York, honoring him for what he said, the opposite of what Ferdinand and Isabel said about expelling the Jews. He welcomed them, seriously, officially. Thank you.
Jack, just one sentence.
Not a question, I just want to add to what was said now about the Sultan. Donna Garcia, she was Jewish, she inherited the biggest merchant fleet in Europe. They were thrown out of Spain, they went to Portugal, from there to Holland, from there to Spanish. She sent emissaries to the Sultan. He said, I'm going to bring my whole fleet, please give cover to my subject. And then he did, and he let them go. She built over there the first hospital in Istanbul, and also a Jewish synagogue. Okay? Thank you.
Do we have a round of response again, or
just one? And we should honor Ottoman Sultan Abdülmecid II, who issued an edict condemning the blood libel in Damascus when it was introduced to the Middle East by Europeans. And it was new to Islam, and he said, we look into Jewish books and there's no nonsense like that, and our Jewish people will be... He said they don't even use animal blood for their rituals. I mean, so this is total nonsense. A lot of bilge from European anti-Semitism was imported into the Middle East. As the Islamic civilization, we have to reject them, as the Ottomans rightly did. And I should say, a lot of Islamophobic narratives have been proliferating today among some people, I think, in Israel or circles, and I think we should be vocal against that too.
all right? So we are informed that time is up. We will not stand between you and the lunch. There's some announcement. Thank you so much for all the speakers and the audience.